If we're talking about the GOAT or greatest of all time when it comes to energy formulas, I'd have to say Gamer Subs. It has that light flavouring, lets you float on air, like prime Michael Jordan in Come Fly With Me, old school reference there. It helps you soar and stay up on that plateau way longer than you should when you expect them. You'd come down a little bit earlier, just like my main man, Jordan, in the late 80s. It helps you come in clutch when you're feeling tired, but you got to get one last shot off. Get one last thing done, just like he always did. And you know what? Just like Michael Jordan's bizarre salary contract status with the Bulls in the late 80s and early 90s, you can get it cheaper than you'd expect because you can get 10% off with my code Thorin, THORIN, at gamersubs.gg. Now, Michael Jordan is the consensus GOAT of basketball, the NBA. I'd probably say he's the GOAT too. I can go back and forwards on that one, but I often do just come to the agreement. I do think he is. I saw most of these players' careers that we're discussing in that sense. He's probably the best scorer in NBA history. In fact, I'll even say, in like the fact people are going to think this is a critical video, he actually could have scored even more in his career. Not only could he probably have broken that scoring record if he'd have chosen to play more seasons, but he could have had even higher averages, I actually think, because if you don't know his career, even when Doug Collins came in, he was still going crazy, had the ultimate green light, shot everything. He was just the best player in the league already. Like you could see in terms of raw ability, individual talent, maybe not as a team player, yes. He wasn't a guy who set up the team like Larry and Magic did. But as a result, it was actually Phil Jackson coming in, using the triangle, having a winning team, trying to make other personalities fit. That meant Jordan's scoring went down when it came to the 90s. He actually could have just gone crazier and tried to just be what Wilt was early in his career. If you don't know, Wilt also reduced his game massively and actually was more of an assist and a rebound guy than a scorer later. But he could have scored even more. So I will say there is a world where Michael Jordan had an even more prolific career than he did. But when people say the line, which is why I phrased my video this way, they say, oh, Jordan, he would score 50 today. He would average 50 today. That's a really classic line. They don't say 40. Often don't say 45. The go-to number, the rig round number, seems to be 50 a game they go to. It's a classic line, not only from like modern players who were fans of Jordan, tends not to be like the really, really young modern players. They only saw LeBron and Kobe, but the ones who are like at the end of their careers now, some of them are now retired, the Wades and the Paces. Also, people from Jordan's era, like the Shaqs of the world, etc., the Hakeem, etc., they all say the same thing. He'd average 50, blah, blah, blah. And what they mean is he would average 50 points if he played at some point in his prime, but it was in today's NBA with today's rule set against today's opposition, blah, 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 etc. By the way, they've basically been saying some variant of this since he retired in like 2003 or whatever. And obviously they didn't mean that Jordan, they meant prime Jordan, etc. Because it was often used, you see it a lot with the NBA, as a way for the old heads to sort of try and imply like the new players aren't as good as we were or my era was better. Now look, in some senses, I agree with them. I certainly think the eras were a lot better and the rule set was so different. I do think sometimes it is haterism though, and I think this is a great example of where it just becomes, unless it's meant to be hyperbole, it actually becomes ridiculous, and you actually sort of tell on yourself that you've never really sat down and thought about what it would take to average 50 points in a game. So I will say there is an area, now most people I see on TV doing this, and in most actual arguments in the internet do mean it literally. They absolutely mean they think Michael Jordan would average 50 points per game. 50 per game. Now, if it was metaphorical or hyperbolic, okay, that's fine. If they just mean he would be the best player still, if they mean he would dominate even harder, if they mean the rule sets made it easier to play against modern defenses and to score and to get to the line. Okay, all these factors, yeah, I'm with you. I think the gist of it makes sense. It's great hyperbole. If it's about the perception of what modern defense is like and whether the modern sports athlete is really that hungry or do they even play defense if they're a star player in the modern, these are all great questions we can have if we're talking about Doncic and Joker and all these guys out there. If we're talking about these, Jokic, if we're talking about these players, we can have these great conversations. Yeah, it's really good. Are they mentally weak compared to the people like Jordan? Do they have the killer instinct of Bird and Kobe? Yeah, these are all great convos. But if we're talking about what would Michael Jordan score if he played now, I think this is ridiculous to say 50 points. I'm just going to say right now, I think he would not average 50 points per game. I think he would probably be the best and most dominant player. I will give you that, but I don't think he would average 50. In fact, I don't think he'd even come close. We'll get later into the video and think what I actually think is a reasonable ballpark as to what he could average. And even then, we're talking about if he went completely crazy, had the green light, maybe didn't have that many other good teammates, and had a coach who basically just said, do what you want, I'll play a fast enough style that you get enough shots off. I don't think people realise how hard it is to average 50. So first things first, let's be real. Yes, defense is way worse in terms of what the rules allow one-on-one defenders to do. But crucially, during the majority of Michael Jordan's career, there wasn't true zone help defense. Forget about when he came back with the Wizards. No one really cares about that era. In his era, it was man-to-man defense. Zone defense was illegal. And if you go and ever look up rules about how help defense worked and how you cheated, look, people like the Bulls could just about make it look like the double team because they had Scottie Pippen in an enormous wingspan, could play all these different positions. They were using like team schemes. If you were just playing normally, the whole way, if anyone knows Michael Jordan's offensive kit, he was utterly dominant, probably the most dominant player, even, by the way, in his prime, even though young Shaq was almost in his prime, he was more dominant individually than Shaq in the context that, yes, Shaq could physically dominate other centers, but back then, one, you could play a lot more physically as a defender, so you could still bang a little bit more with someone like Shaq. But more importantly, someone like Jordan would nearly always be slightly taller than the person guarding him. And if you just spread the floor in a half-court offense, then what would happen is you could just set up, as happened, especially the latter half of his career, you would just give it to Michael Jordan in like the low post. He would just back down a little bit and either go for like a spin and do a move in towards the basket, floater, like short, fading midway, or he'd spin the other way off the guy and do that fadeaway baseline jump shot that everyone's seen a million times. That's why he was the master at that point in time. Now, what meant he could just do that over and over as many times he wanted is that back then you could play isolation. Spoiler, I've always thought, I'll make a video on this one day, this is the most underrated area of the comparison between Kobe and Jordan, is Kobe actually played in an era where they allowed a type of defense that made it way harder to be exactly that type of dominant mid-range guard scorer, not a center, etc. That's actually a scenario where in some ways you'd rather be able to play isolation than have team and help defense constantly running you off or making you shoot over two people or just having another person in your face when you go to take the shot. So you have to imagine in the modern day, and especially if Michael Jordan hadn't just existed magically for this one season where he's going to average 50, if he just existed like LeBron and Kobe did, where people see, right, this guy's in the league, I'm going to have to deal with him at some point in time. In fact, I'm even going to have to make my team based on what I'm going to do against him. Then here's what you would do in the modern day. You would do what a bunch of teams did against the really good perimeter players. You wouldn't just have one really good lockdown defensive player who's like a guard or small forward. What you'd do is you'd have a whole bunch of good roaming and help defenders, and then you'd have schemes. And as a result, you would be able to make these people go to where they have worse shooting percentages. You would be able to keep them from driving to the basket. You would be able to make them take contested threes and long twos. Like this happens to all the modern scorers now. It happened to the great scorers in Kobe's era. You think because Michael Jordan's some god, he just would dance around everyone in every scenario. Like, guys, there's people who have handles that are better than Michael Jordan's. People who are better at dribbling than Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan's excellent at a lot of things. There's people who are better shooters than Michael Jordan. Why don't they just choose to score 50 by this logic if it's such a piss-easy era? The point is, when you take all factors into account, you see it just becomes less and less plausible, and especially the 50, you're just overshooting it by like a solid 10 points per game. So it's actually you who's underestimating how hard the NBA is generally. Now then, let's consider, it's not like he existed in the 70s when there was no three-point shot. There's been a three-point shot all of Michael Jordan's career. And there were times where he tried to be a good three-point shooter. Remember the famous finals where, I think, was it game one or game two? I think it was game one. Against Portland, where the whole thing was Clyde Drexler was a bit more of a three-point shooter than Jordan. So Jordan shot all those three-pointers and made, what was it, 5 or 6 in the first half and did the like, what's going on, guys? To Magic in the that was in 92. So if you go and look later in his career, in 1997, Jordan attempted 3.6 three-pointers a game and made 37%. In 1996, he attempted 3.2 three-pointers a game and made 42%. And in 1990, he attempted 3.0 three-pointers a game and made 37%. Now, the first two, the really good percentages, so 37 on 3.6 and 42% on 3.2, those were when, bizarrely, They made the three-point line shorter in the NBA, and also it was the expansion draft period where you had all these crap teams coming like the Vancouver Grizzlies, and he just farmed off that. And even then, his best was 42% and only on 3.2 attempts in 96. Other than that, he's just like an above-average three-point shooter. He wasn't really much of a three-point shooter. People don't know, during Michael Jordan's actual prime, in fact, let's look. During Michael Jordan's actual prime, we'll ignore this one because it was only 17 games when he came back with the I'm back, and he only took 1.9. So obviously it's an incredibly small sample size. But if we look at the best 3 seasons he had here, it was 96, 97, and 1990, right? The problem here is he's already shooting 3-pointers. He's just an above average, good. He's not close to the best. He's not like a Reggie Miller. He's just good. But you look, in his actual monster seasons, everyone thinks of Jordan as a scoring god from the 80s when he was just turned loose with the green light, right? That's when he was taking fuck all 3-pointers. He wasn't even attempting. Look, 87, he's taking 0.8. 85, 0.6. 86, he takes 1 per game. 88, he takes 0.6 per game. 92, he takes 1. He just took fuck all 3-pointers for most of his career. So he did attempt to. He just wasn't an amazing 3-point shooter. And back then, the game wasn't played that way, obviously. Now, it's not as simple, by the way, of saying, but he just mastered it, though, because he was Michael Jordan and he just mastered it. No, it's not. You can't say that until he did it. It's just not the way the game, put it this way, if the game instead, I don't know what meta it would have to be in this sense, but if the game wasn't really about individual scoring, which to be fair, a lot of people said the game wasn't before Michael Jordan came along, and he had to play like Magic Johnson, would he just be an even better point guard than Magic Johnson? Now, he could get stats that say he is, Russell Westbrook style. There was that period where Doug Collins came in, they made him the point guard, he had a triple-double in 7 out of 8 games or something. They had to take him off because he was almost abusing the rules, Westbrook style. Yeah, he could do that, but would he actually be a better playmaker than Magic? I mean, you could say that if you're a massive Michael Jordan fan. I think that's outrageous. If you think this guy didn't ever practice court vision, passing, his main strength was scoring, and so he did that. And Magic's main strength was passing, and he made sure he did that too. So to me, I think it's very naive and reductive to think these guys just don't try these things. Now, true, obviously people hadn't scaled up 3-point shooting. So I'm going to say in the modern day it takes way more than 3.6. But remember, if you're talking about the idea he'd just master it, I mean, in his era, there were people just way better at 3-point shooting. So let's just go and look, shall we? Obviously, Reggie Miller was considered the best in the 90s, wasn't he? So if we go to Reggie Miller, look how many 3-pointers he attempts. So 97, he attempts, we won't do 97 overall there. Let's see, where is it? Oh, no, yeah, we'll do 97. He took 6.6. That's when Jordan was taking 3.6, by the way. Why is Jordan taking almost half as many as Reggie Miller? Does he not like making more points? I even told you he was making a decent percentage. True, you'll get here in a second, people hadn't understood you do score more points that way. But it's also just he chose not to. He chose not to make that his game. So 6.6 is what Reggie took at the time. And he made 42%, excellent percentage. True, he's run off screens and all the rest of it. It's not the same as a Steph Curry, pull up with someone in your face. That's why Steph Curry's the best shooter of all time. Unless Larry Bird played an extra 10 years or whatever. He got 5.8 attempts in 95. 41% still excellent. 5.7 for only 36.6 by Reggie's standards, not that great. But it's in 2001, when he's 35 years old, to be fair. Yeah, 40% over here. In fact, you see, he's always, almost his entire career, these bottom numbers here are almost like Jordan's best attempts. So already Jordan could have attempted a lot more. It's just they didn't understand the meta in his era. And spoiler, I think he just wasn't the greatest 3-point shooter and knew he wasn't. So, but let's look even before that, because obviously someone who was a very good 3-point shooter, admittedly they took a lot less in his era, was Larry Bird in the 80s, right? I think actually still a true contender for best shooter ever. It's between him and Steph Curry, in my opinion. So if you go here, Larry Bird, his best seasons, he took 3.3 in 91. That's still more than Jordan was taking in 90, by the way, and he made 38.9%, very good percent. He took 3.1 in 88, see when he's getting up there, and that was a 41%, excellent shooting percentage. He took 3.0 in 1987, and that was 40%. You can see he's around a similar kind of a range that Michael Jordan was taking in his prime of taking threes. He's a better shooter significantly, and there's a reason he takes more volume. So, and also his team moved the ball a lot more, so you're yourself going to get more outside shots. Michael Jordan went down low and became a black hole and took a million great isolation shots that he made 50% of, and hence he's the greatest scorer ever. But you needed Phil Jackson and the system and the triangle and Scottie Pippen. But that's why you need all those other things. things. I always think the idea that like Michael Jordan just playing the way he did would have played the same way in any team, any era, that would make his teams just as good, as many rings. That's so reductive and stupid. It's the worst version of single factor analysis because it's one player out of a team sport that it always just makes me think like people like that are intentionally running from factors and other analysis points. They're not actually trying to embrace them and understand it. They're like making it silly to consider other things just because they want it to be simplistic. Like 6 is better than 4. Like, yeah, no shit. But the question is it actually better to have more rings if you had to play with certain players? That's the point. They're all the interesting discussions. Not is 6 a bigger number than 4. We can all agree on that one, right? It's not an actual meaningful fucking statement, is it? Unless we can attach it and get some analysis going from it. So then consider this. That's just in his era, right? So Bird was before, Reggie was during his time period. Let's look in the modern day at what he takes, because actually, here's what's interesting. Kevin Durant takes a comparable amount of threes to Reggie Miller. It's just obviously Kevin Durant doesn't take a million off threes and have to be set up. He can just create his own shot, can't he? So if we go look at Kevin Durant took 6.7 threes and made 38.7%, pretty good percent, in 2016 when he was with the Thunder still. Another Thunder season, he took 6.1 and he made 39%, very good. In 2018 with the Warriors, he took 6.1 and made 41.9%, which is absurd. It's extremely good, especially for that amount of skill. And you can see almost all his career, he's taken more three-pointers than Jordan. Now, let's imagine, bearing in mind, these are two incredible perimeter players. And if you consider the height of KD, arguably, he should actually have an even easier time getting closer to the basket in the modern day than Jordan against zone defense. He can just shoot over them in a way that Jordan and Kobe couldn't to the same degree. So in theory, you'd think this guy could take way more. He only chooses to take at most 6.7, 6.1, 6.1. He doesn't go to the hardened levels of 12 and the Curry and 8 and 9 and more to get. So it doesn't mean Michael Jordan would, especially because Michael Jordan was a monster slashing to the basket earlier in his career and in the open court or in a half court offense where he can isolate and play an amazing mid-range game and score, which, by the way, still works. Kevin Durant, DeMar DeRozan, when he was around Kobe, still all did that. Were very, very effective. Were very good. It's just that doesn't make you as many points as threes. It doesn't go at the same tempo of three-pointers. And you accept when you get the opportunity to, like, you notice most of those guys play like a point guard. Jordan had Pippen having the ball a lot of the time. Yeah, admittedly, if you're hard at it, so you can go to the basket all the time too. So I would think Jordan would actually lean on that more than the three-point shooting. So I think the three-point shooting's a red herring on this one, guys. I wouldn't go too far into that. But then let's look at the James Harden one, because obviously James Harden, in his most ridiculous years, is comparable to 80s Jordan, where he just had the green light, not very many good players, and you shoot as many shots as he could. So we go, look, obviously James Harden broke the concept of how many three-pointers you can attempt. Like, this guy in 2019 attempted 13.2 three-pointers a game and shot 36.8%. I mean, just for the sheer amount of threes he's shooting, by the way, that actual percentage is very good. Then he shot 12.4 in 2020, and that was 35.5%. Again, the bulk is just so crazy. These aren't even bad numbers, guys. Then he shot 10 three-pointers a game in 2018, it's all for the Rockets, and that was 36.7%. Now, look, the bullshit step back, extra step that they let Harden do, which is why I think his numbers are always inflated for the three-pointers. Yes, if you let Michael Jordan do that, or Kobe do that, or anyone, if they could just be here now, they would all score more and they would all take more three-pointers. I'm with you on that. But I actually think if you just look at their careers, eye test, even looking within the scale, most of these players are just better three-point shooters than Jordan. I even think from watching both their careers that Kobe was a better, not only three-point shooter, but just a better shooter in general. The reason why Jordan had higher from the field is he, A, played in an era where you could ISO all the time and go to the basket a lot more, and he also, in my opinion, just played in teams where they did like open court basketball more. He didn't have like Shaq slowly coming down that you set up to a half court, throw the ball at him. He didn't have that type of a setup. It wasn't that type of team. Him and Pippen, even in the 90s when they were in the 30s and 35, used to just run up and down the court passing and just dominate, just have passing and fucking pick and rolls and simple sets. It was just, that's why they loved the triangle by the end. So to me, they just wouldn't play that sort of a game. So even if he went and did this crazy approach that Harden did, of taking like 13, 10, 9 three-pointers, if you actually ever go and look, he'd have to be like Steph Curry levels of accuracy to actually make the 50 points you're talking about. Because, spoiler, Curry takes lots of threes, makes lots of threes, and doesn't make 50 points himself, does he? So to me, the problem with this whole topic is, yeah, Michael Jordan had an amazing mindset, seemed to set his mind to everything. When he came in the league, he was more of an athletic player and a slasher to the basket, but then he became an amazing mid-range shooter when people tried tried to force that as like the counter to what he was doing, and that became his specialty. Yeah, this is all great, but that doesn't mean I know he'd do another thing and dominate in another way. Now, I will say, as I said before, there was a different meta understanding back then, which is what people didn't get basically is because it was more about like qualitative judgment than maths and math stats is. People really hadn't figured out that if you can scale up the number of threes you take and you can make at least 36%, look at the numbers I was saying for most of these top players, if you can just shoot 36% from three, which for these top players who practice a lot is not an unreasonable ask, that is as good as shooting 54% from 2 points. Now, if you don't know, Michael Jordan didn't even shoot 54% more seasons from 2 points. He's considered one of the best 2-point shooters ever, like mid-range players. If you want to get 54 or higher from 2 point, you're normally talking about either someone like DeAndre Jordan, who's just around the basket permanently, or you're actually talking about like Shaq and Wilt and just the best centers of all time who do play very close to the basket, and even their shots are just like 2 or 3 feet out. So what people didn't realize is scaled up, anyone who's an above average 3-point shooter actually becomes, in a sense, if you can get the ball to him enough and move the ball around, more effective than a lot of the dominant low post players, so which completely inverted basketball, because the whole point is, back in the day, you went for the reliable 55% center over the shooter that you thought to get anywhere close to a 36 or higher percent. You'd have to like get him off a screen, perfectly open, like all this stuff. He'd have to set up like, he only does only certain players can do it. Like, it was a different game back then, sure. But let's be real. In this world where Michael Jordan shoots more and more threes and takes that approach, etc., that means, for a start off, he's doing less of the easier isolation 2-point approaches that he take. He's having less times he just freely gets to the basket. People would play behind the ball a lot more, and not like they'd essentially let a defender hang back almost like a safety in the NFL and wait for him to be in the open court like they do with LeBron to try and cut him off. They would do all these things. And then let's be real, one of the classic things about any sport is there's only so many hours in the day to practice. So the more time you put into these long-range 3-pointers, the less time you put into something else. Whether that be you working on your post game, on your mid-range, whatever it might be, working on the basket, whatever it is, there's only so much time in the day. And already there's a guy who put in a lot of time practicing. So to me, it's just naive to think every area stays equally as good. The other areas all power up and nothing changes. Remember, you'd be playing a totally different style of opposition. Then, and the most key point, I could have put this at the beginning, but I thought I'd just get to it now, is do you know how many field goals you'd have to take to average 50 points? Unless you're also delusional and think he's just going to shoot like 75% from the field, because in this world everyone's going to foul him, and so he's just going to the basket all day long. Like, you'd have to really think the modern athlete is absolute shit to think he could make it. Because understand this, at the peak of his career, so let's go look here, Michael Jordan in 2-pointers, we'll just go field goals attempted. The most he ever took in that season where he went absolutely bonkers and averaged his highest, 37.1 points in 1987. He took 27.8 field goals a game. Now, that is absurd, by the way. Like, what's the most Reggie Miller ever took? 15 in a game. Larry Bird, 22. This is around his peak, 22. James Harden. Even James Harden, mate, only took 24. Michael Jordan took 27.8. Yeah, James Harden, with no good players that season and permanent green light, only took 24.5. And he was shooting every fucking time down. Kevin Durant, the most he's ever taken is 20. Part of that was old Westelbrook denying him the ball, but okay, he's only ever taken 20. One of the best scorers of all time, by the way. I don't think people get it. So he took 27.8, and he made every game, because he was better taking 3-pointers, he would make 13.4, sorry, 4, not 2, 13.4 field goal, 2-pointers a game. Or 13.2, 2-pointers a game. And that got him with everything. By the way, he was taking a lot of free throws. There's another thing. A lot of people don't take as many free throws. Even Kevin Durant doesn't take as many, because you just don't get to the basket as much with the way they play the defense. It encourages you to take the outside shot, and you're taking more outside shots. So you already got a lot of free throws. So by the way, the more threes go up, we're going to be getting less free throws attempt. Well, Michael Jordan's a fantastic free throw shooter, just like Kobe. He shoots an insane percentage. In his case, 85%. Kobe was more like 89%. But yeah, so there's some points guaranteed, by the way. You're making 10 free throws a game. That's 10 points. That's 10 out of your 37 come from that. You'd be making less. You'd be taking less free throws overall. And you'd be shooting more threes. You're going to miss some, but you're going to score more points overall, but you're going to make less free throws. So actually, in some ways, it's less guaranteed scoring. And that is to average 37.1. Not even 40. You guys want him to have 50 a game. Now consider one person ever in the history of the NBA did get 50 a game. By the way, I think the highest after Wilt's 50 is this Michael Jordan with 37.1 from what I remember. Now, of course, that's Wilt Chamberlain, right? Wilt Chamberlain, to get 50 points a game, obviously he was primarily a 2-point scorer. I mean, there was no 3-point line back then. Had to attempt 39.5 field goals a game. If we round that up, guys, Wilt Chamberlain was attempting 40 field goals a game to average 50. Which isn't even bad, by the way, with the scale we're talking about. And he used to make 50%, hence why he was making around 50 once you added in the free throws, etc., etc., etc. Michael Jordan at his most took 27 a game. I showed you what the others took. They've never taken that many. Like, in this world, he'd have to average, like, even if he now takes a bunch of threes and makes, like, 2 or 3 threes a game, now we're talking about him having to also take, like, an extra something like, realistically, an extra 7, maybe even 9, 7 to 9 shots extra a game. Do people even understand the level of fatigue your body would be under if you took that many shots? Like, there's a reason you can't scale it beyond what we've done. People like James Harden have broken where you can scale it to. Wilt Chamberlain in 2-pointers broke where you could scale it to. That's why no one ever attempted 50 a game ever again. And no one, quite frankly, could have done it without, no matter how many shots they were given. You'd just be insanely tired. If you don't know, Wilt's one of the all-time great athletes. Michael Jordan, one of the all-time great athletes. But even so, this would be inhuman stuff to be averaging like 35 field goal attempts. That's just chucking it up. Attempts a game. And by the way, 3-pointers take even more out of you because of the range, right? Wilt's just taken some of these close to the basket with a fall-away jumper. Then consider this. If all these rules are so easy to abuse, why don't Durant and LeBron and Steph Curry, Doncic, why don't they just smash it and average 40 a game? Why could no one even get to 40 a game? Because the amount of shots you need is insane. They're already making threes at an insane clip here. They already can go to the line all day long if they go through with the fouls and the tic-tac. Yeah, get all that. Even with all of that, they're getting nowhere close to the amount of shots up, and they're nowhere close to the points. Remember, you all said 50, not 40. Even 40 would be a stretch here. So to me, it just doesn't work. Like, you just look at how many there is overall. Like, Harden in that 2019 season took 24 shots a game, guys. And he really likes to shoot. Really likes to shoot. People like Durant, Kobe, LeBron, these are some of the all-time great players to ever play basketball. And they're nowhere close to this 50 points. Nor even in the ballpark of getting close to it. And then let's add in as well, by the way, in a league that now is based around understanding that you scale up 3-point shooting, you'd have loads of shooting talent in the league, like there are in all the top teams now, and all these 3-point specialists, right? So surely Michael Jordan, if he's actually good at basketball, would pass to them a lot as well when they have open corner threes, in which case he's not going to average as many raw attempts himself, and he's going to get more assists. Like, you know what? Maybe he does like Harden and he averages 10 assists and he wins more MVPs in that way. I mean, it's hard to win more MVPs than Michael Jordan did, but he might win more in a different style, basically. And it might even help his team be like number one in the division or whatever. But the problem is he'd be scoring less points, wouldn't he, as a result? It's one of the reasons I actually think LeBron doesn't score as many points in the modern day, though he probably could if he forced himself to. Now, as much as people are going to say, yeah, but the thing is, Thorin, and I agree, the game's less mental now. It's, you know, it's not as physical. You don't have to be as tough. It's like, yeah, I'm with you. But in some senses, it's more athletic. It's certainly, it might not be more mental at an individual level, but it's got more team strategy, and the tactics seem more advanced overall beyond hitting people and stopping them putting their hand up. Like, you actually have to play, you have to get in front of them and cut them off and cut off passing lanes. Like, there's still some fundamental basketball concepts being applied here. And in that sense, I actually think it's like the NFL. The NFL was completely gutted for the defensive rules. They made it way too easy to be an offensive player. So why doesn't everyone just score 50 points a game and every top wide receiver have 3 touchdowns a game? Because what evened it up was the meta of the fact that people got more advanced with the schemes on the defensive side, like how you play help defense, how you read what they're doing, being able to break down advanced data like you couldn't in the 80s. If you're on an aeroplane to the next game in the 1980s, you can maybe watch some film, but it'll just be the TV broadcast. In the modern day, you can have a little iPad and you can just be watching all your little routes that you talk, all your little plays, what your opposing guy does, what he likes. You can be looking at the calls. You can be figuring out all sorts of stuff. And the same in NBA that you just couldn't do back then. So teams would also focus everything around this guy in a way you couldn't in the 80s when you were just going for a back-to-back and everyone was drinking 5 beers on the plane flight at night. You didn't have these teams of stat nerds, etc. So also, let me spin it the other way. Let me just ask this question. By that logic, why didn't Jordan average 60 in his era? Now, if you think, What are you talking about? It was one of the greatest eras. I agree. I think overall, the 80s is the sweet spot in basketball. But I'll tell you right now, if Wilt averaged 50 in the 1960s, let me see what year it was that he actually did that. Yes, there we go. It was 1962 was the season where Wilt Chamberlain averaged 50.4, right? Why is it that 20 and 30 years later, why isn't Jordan averaging 60 by that logic? Because the same logic applies, by the way. It became easier to play defense. There wasn't even a three-point line, by the way, in Wilt's era. There was one in Jordan's era. In fact, Jordan even benefited from the shortest three-point line ever in history. In that 96, 97 period or whatever, it was shorter than it is now. So in that scenario, why didn't he just have all the same things Wilt did, and then on top of it, just go crazy and add a bunch of threes in and score 60 and average 60. Jordan didn't even average 40. He averaged 37 point whatever it was in his best ever season in the 80s when they turned the green light loose and he went mental. There's a saying that they had that Wilt once said to Michael Jordan that it's gangster as fuck if you know how the rules have changed in the NBA. He said to Jordan, because they were like the two alphas that obviously each thought they were the greatest player ever, said to Jordan, they had to change the rules to stop me from dominating. They changed the rules to make you dominate. Some words to that effect. And if you ever go back and look at it, that people like Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem are the reason why they nerfed the rules and made it so like big men weren't as important. People like Michael Jordan and Kobe are the ones that are why they made the rules softer and softer and softer and made the game more about guards and smaller guys and scoring and all. This really is how the NBA altered the game. And it wasn't just like, I'm the best player, so I'll play. They actually were nerfing people for being the best. People like Barkley were too good at backing you down. So suddenly there was like a defensive rule as to how long you're allowed to back someone down. Like, what's that? By that logic, if Steph Curry's too good at three-pointers, he just shouldn't be allowed to take them so close. Like, it should be like a 40-foot three-pointer. That would be the equivalent, by the way. That's what they used to do to the old school players that were considered boring, though. So I think people are massively underestimating this topic. And also, you're sort of being a bit silly in showing that if you say that, you actually don't understand the basketball that came before Jordan's era. Because absolutely, it should have been easier for Jordan to score in his era than it was for Wilt. And yet Wilt averaged many more points than Jordan, even at his prime. So here's what I'll say overall. I don't think Michael Jordan would or even could average 50 points per game because I don't think anyone can average 50 points per game beyond one guy called Wilt Chamberlain who was playing under very unique circumstances and might be the greatest physical specimen athlete to ever play any sport or sporting endeavor in human history. You just have to go and look it up and look at the feats this guy was capable. He wasn't like any other person to ever play. He almost seemed superhuman in that regard, athletically. Hence, he could take 39-something shots a game and make 50% and average 50 points per season. Now, I could believe Jordan would average 40 points per game, which would be excellent in this era and show how truly great he was. I could even believe that in his best seasons, that would be the result. I even think, by the way, if you look at the career of people like Kobe, they could have had many more 60 and 70-point games. If you look at how many times his team was leading and he got took out after three quarters or pulled it in the fourth when they're 20 points up, or you've just done enough damage anyway and you just cool off and you say, screw it, or you pass a bit more. They all could have gone for more. Then let's add in the modern day, you can say it be otherwise, but coaches and all the rest of them, they pay you so much now, they have a lot more say in what you do as a player. So load management would be a thing for Michael Jordan because, spoiler, it's a thing for everyone in the modern day. I think even Kobe wouldn't get away with it. And in fact, I'll even say, I think both avoiding load management and playing through injury when you're obviously injured. I actually think Kobe ruined the NBA forever for that now, by the way. What happened to him in the 2013 season? I don't think they'll let you be a hero like that and just push through the pain, etc. In the same way as they're not going to let people just play through concussions every game in the NFL now. If it seems like it's dodgy, they're going to pull you. Like, you're just not going to get the same chances. So in my opinion, you also would just have less opportunities to score as much as you're thinking. And let's be real, as much as everyone laughed at Mark Cuban, he's not wrong. If you actually could have, A, known what happened to Kobe then, and then B, if you just knew how it was going to limit the Lakers' contract, amnestying a player like that wouldn't even be unfair when they're that old. They shouldn't be playing that much. It's ridiculous. There's no wonder things broke down. Then let's be real. Like, Jordan wouldn't have to score as many points because I think in the modern day, his defensive skills, assuming he kept that mentality up, would still make him a very, very dominant player because he could help shut down your player and your star a lot while scoring 40. So maybe he scores 40 and limits your player by a few points and you just dominate that way, which is kind of like what he did in the 90s. But he also would then suffer from the defensive rules being fucked. And he also would foul a lot more, even though I will say, if you go and look at people like Kobe in the latter day, they definitely give them a very favourable defensive whistle. They let them get away with a lot more than other players or role players who were arguably as good or better perimeter defenders. And Jordan, by the way, was an extremely good two-way player and defender. There's a reason why he won Defensive Player of the Year one year during one of the championship years. So I actually think overall, if you look at how Michael Jordan's game was insane in the isolation mid-range two-point, I actually think he might have played in the most sweet spot era for his style and to output big numbers, even though if he hadn't have had Phil Jackson, the triangle, and those Bulls teams, maybe he would have scored even more. But I imagine he also would have a lot less rings in his cabinet / on his hand right now. So in terms of individual dominance, he might not only have played in the best era, but I don't think he would, and I don't think he could average 50 points per game in today's NBA. This video and the content on this channel is very kindly supported by my Patreon community, and in particular, Kokupsi. So thanks to him. Do you want to choose what topic I talk about and focus on next for a Thorin Side video? Maybe you want to ask a question in one of those monthly AMAs, or choose which topic from one of those I build into a bigger video. Do you want teasers to find out who the guests are for the Thor Inquiry interviews? Maybe you want to take part in a private, never to be released discussion with yours truly. Well, if so, heed this call to action and join Thorin Side today. The Patreon link in the description box below.